What do you get if you cross a fish tank with a Cybertruck? This is the powered by MSI Project Zero Essential desktop. This time around, compared to the last time we looked at a powered by MSI desktop, it's been put together by Cyberpower PC. It's got MSI components everywhere except for the memory and the processor. It's about as MSI as you can get when building a desktop PC in 2025. Let's put it through its paces, shall we? Hi guys, I'm Matt and welcome to Kit Gurus. First things first then, the naming. Although it's called the PBM Project Zero Essential, with this config, exactly as I've got it from them, it's not actually gone fully down the Project Zero route. The case supports the Project Zero kind of back connect motherboards, but it's a standard layout and built with a Z890 Tomahawk Wi-Fi board that's been sent out to us. So there's no Project Zero, although the name does indicate that there is. Picking up this exact spec, which I'll run through in full in a moment, will cost you £2,149.20, including delivery and Cyberpower standard desktop warranty, which covers labour for 5 years, parts for 2 years, and collect and return costs for a year, as well as lifetime technical support. Compare this to building your own, including shelling out for a retail license of Windows, and it comes out to around £100 markup. That's honestly not too bad for the peace of mind you get from the warranty. It stretches to more like £200 if you've already got a Windows license though, or if you get one from more questionable sources. The CPU is an Intel Core Ultra 7 265KF. Now, your guess is as good as mine as to why they went with Intel over AMD, but here we are, we've got to have a look at what they sent to us. The 265KF is a 20-core, 20-thread processor featuring 8 performance cores which run at a base clock speed of 3.9 GHz and can boost up to 5.5 GHz on paper. Then there's 12 efficiency cores alongside those, running at 3.3 GHz base clock speed and capable of boosting up to 4.6 GHz. Base power for the CPU is listed as 125 watts by Intel with a maximum turbo power rating of 250 watts. The GPU is an MSI Gaming Trio RTX 5070 Ti. This is a triple fan 2.5 slot chunky boy. It features 16 gig of GDDR7 VRAM running across a 256-bit memory bus. Base clock speeds are 2295 MHz and then boost clock speeds are 2572 MHz as reported by GPU Z. Being a 50 series NVIDIA card, it supports all of the latest features like multi-frame gen and DLSS 4 upscaling, which we'll take a look at in a bit more detail when we go through some gaming tests later on. For memory, we have 64 gig of Corsair Vengeance DDR5, a dual channel kit consisting of two 32 gig modules. It's not the fastest memory ever, running at 5200 megatransfers with CL40 timings. The speed won't be as important when compared to running an AMD-based system, so I won't moan as much as I usually do, but I'd still like to have seen something a bit better, to be honest. Plus, it's not RGB either, whereas the cooler and all 7 of the included fans are. It's not really sure what the thinking was there and why they haven't just stuck some RGB memory in to match everything else. I'd probably go for something a bit quicker, a bit tighter if I was picking up a system like this. It's easy enough to choose different memory if you do pick up a system from Cyberpower, and it's not that much more money, 30 quid, 50 quid, something like that. Storing everything, we have a 2TB MSI Spatium, whatever you want to call it, M480 Gen 4 M.2 SSD. It's a decent size for storing big games, and the speeds are nothing to grumble about either. It hits 6,944 megabytes per second read and 6,713 megabytes per second write when I tested it with Crystal Disk Mark. All of those components are sitting in an MSI Z890 Tomahawk Wi-Fi motherboard, a board that Leo quite liked the looks of in his MSI Z890 board roundup a while ago, but he found the feature set to be very similar to the Pro Z890-A. I've got to say, I agree with Leo, the design is great, black and a kind of yellowy goldy colour theme. It's close enough to a wolves themed motherboard for a yam yam like me. It sits at the more budget end of MSI's motherboard lineup when compared to some of their higher end models, but I think it's a great pick for a system like this. It's got 4 total M.2 slots, one of which supports PCIe Gen 5, and all of them are cooled with MSI M.2 Shield Frozer heatsinks. Around the back in terms of I/O, we've got HDMI port, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 1 USB Type-C 10GB port, 3 USB Type-A 10GB ports, 4 USB Type-A 5GB port. Then you've got 5GB networking and Wi-Fi 7 antenna connections. And then you've got SP-Diff and analog audio ports down at the bottom. You've got a pair of buttons for flashing the BIOS or clearing the CMOS. And then in terms of wireless networking, the board supports Wi-Fi 7, as I just mentioned, with the connectors, along with Bluetooth 5.4, and that's all handled by Intel's killer Wi-Fi module and killer networking. Keeping the lights on and everything ticking over is an MSI Mag A1000GL power supply. This is a fully modular unit with an 80+ gold rating, and it's going to be easily enough to handle the specs that we've got going on and we're looking at today. For processor cooling, we have an MSI Core Liquid E360 ARGB AIO cooler. It's a bit of a mouthful. A decent and kind of slightly no frills cooler that focuses on the task at hand rather than showing you GIFs and stuff like that. It comes with 3 ARGB fans on the radiator, as the name suggests, and listen to this, this is how MSI describe it on their website. The Mag Core Liquid E-Series, inspired by the passing of time and the shape of solar eclipse, is an innovative product that combines advanced cooling technology with a striking visual design. The Mag Core Liquid E-Series circular shape represents the cyclical nature of time and the continuous flow of energy. Who wrote that? Give them a pay rise. I had to read that out as I think it's hilarious. It reminds me of adverts for perfume or aftershave. Have you ever looked at your cooler on your computer and been reminded of the passing of time? Yeah, me neither at all, ever. That is ridiculous. Finally, everything I just mentioned is housed inside an MSI Mag Pano 100R Project Zero case in black, as you can see on the desk in front of me. It's a wide and quite chunky case which focuses on lots of glass and lots of sharp angles and lines. I/O is on the side rather than the front, thanks to the front being glass almost entirely, and it consists of a pair of USB Type-A 5GB ports, a single USB Type-C 20GB port, a combo 3.5mm audio jack, and a pair of buttons for turning the thing on and off, and then cycling through some preset different lighting options for all the RGB going on inside. There's plenty of ventilation on the back side, thanks to it being almost entirely perforated. That should allow for a good amount of air to get through to the side-mounted fans. It comes with 4 pre-installed 120mm fans in total, 3 reverse blades on the side for intake, and then 1 standard in the back for exhaust, and that's alongside the 3 that are on the radiator, which are also exhausting out of the top of the case. There's some space in the bottom as well for adding more fans if you want to. Design-wise then, and I know I made a little joke about it earlier, but honestly, I don't mind the looks of the system. The case is kind of a deceptive chonker, but it's not overly massive. The RGB balance could be a little bit better with the addition of some RGB memory, as I mentioned earlier. If you're going to go RGB, then go RGB, don't skimp out on it. The cooler, while being quite simple, doesn't look too bad at all in my opinion. The build has been physically put together pretty well. Cable management is good, helped in part by the generous amount of space around the back side of the case. Some cable extensions wouldn't go amiss and would definitely help elevate the looks a little bit, but overall, I think good job, Cyberpower, you've put this thing together pretty well. If you're looking for a new chair, then definitely go and check out boolies.co.uk. They offer a whole host of gaming and office chairs that come in a variety of different finishes and different colours. As for the config side of stuff, there were a few things I had to tinker with before testing. As usual, I updated Windows. That's nothing out of the ordinary though. I do that on all of the pre-builts that I look at. But the memory was not set up correctly out of the box. XMP wasn't enabled in BIOS, so speeds were running at 4,800 megatransfers and not the 5,200 megatransfers that the memory that's advertised on the website and that the memory is capable of. I had to go in and enable it myself. And the GPU drivers needed an update too. The machine arrived with me running NVIDIA drivers version 576.88, which originally released in July of this year. So they're a couple of months old. And this isn't the end of the world, but a final check before it leaves Cyberpower's warehouse or facility could have helped with that sort of stuff. Finally, let's look at some gaming then, what we're all waiting for. Kicking things off in a Plague Tale Requiem at 1440p maximum settings, the game ran at around 100 to 120 FPS during one of the opening scenes. Enabling DLSS at the performance preset sees the FPS increase to around 180 to 200, that's quite a decent bump. Then adding in some frame generation pushes it even further, seeing the FPS meter climb up to north of 300, hitting almost 350 at certain points. Turning up the resolution to 4K and running through the same three scenarios, starting without DLSS or frame gen, resulted in performance of 60 to 70 FPS. Then again, adding DLSS on the performance preset increases the results to around 100 to 120 FPS. And finally, adding in frame gen pushed the FPS meter up to around 150 to 160. Running through that same setup of testing in Cyberpunk 2077 then, starting at 1440p max settings with no scaling whatsoever, sees performance of around 80 FPS. That's on maximum settings and it's pretty respectable. Turning on DLSS performance mode resulted in the FPS meter almost doubling, hovering around the 150 level. This time around, we have 4x multi-frame generation to play around with, whereas that wasn't the case in Plague Tale. And just saying that, I can hear the keyboards furiously typing comments about fake frames and moaning about it. Just get over it, move on with your lives. If you don't like it, that's great. It's a feature, so I'm going to test it. You don't need to moan at me in the comments for pointing out that it increases frames. People want to see this stuff. Anyway, turning it on pushes the FPS up to over 400. The gains are insane, and admittedly, probably not even needed at this resolution, but insane nonetheless. Cranking Cyberpunk up to 4K and running at max settings without any NVIDIA witchcraft results in performance of around 40 FPS. That's not amazing whatsoever. But not to worry, NVIDIA have a setting for that, DLSS, again at the performance preset, and it increases the FPS to around 100 at 4K. And if that's not good enough for you, ignore all the haters and turn on MFG and watch the FPS counter swell up to 270 at 4K. Welcome to the future of gaming, I guess. For a better look at competitive titles without any settings to annoy all you purists, we have CounterStrike 2. At 1440p maximum settings, the FPS meter sat somewhere in between 280 and 300 most of the time. Easily enough frames for my puny eyes to handle. Even at 4K in Counter-Strike, the performance was north of 150 FPS, which I know isn't the levels that serious Counter-Strike players want to see, but for anyone playing at a more casual level, I think that's more than acceptable. Anyone taking the game very seriously would likely be playing with optimal settings and possibly at 1080p anyway. For mere mortals like me though, I'd call the performance pretty good. Back over in single player RPG land then, and we've got Hogwarts Legacy, which is a pretty demanding game in all fairness. Running it at 1440p with max settings and no scaling or frame gen turned on, resulted in performance of around 100. That's in Hogsmeade, and I reckon I've got the world record of running laps around this in-game town by now. Turning on both DLSS at the performance preset and enabling 4x multi-frame generation, pretty much quadruples the FPS. The meter reads between 350 and 400 while running a lap around Wizard Town. The performance at 4K scales about the same. Running the game without any scaling or frame gen results in FPS of around 60 to 70. Honestly, very decent in itself and probably how I'd choose to experience the game if this were my PC. If you don't mind taking a bit of a hit to visuals and latency though, which is less of an issue in a single player title like this, I guess, then turning on performance DLSS and 4x MFG will net you around 270 FPS roughly. The penultimate title we're testing today is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which doesn't support frame gen, but does offer DLSS. At 1440p max settings here, I recorded around 220 FPS, with the game feeling great and still looking pretty good. Up at 4K, that rasterized performance was around 60 to 70. so it does take a bit of a hit. But then if you add in some DLSS at 4K, you see a decent gain in performance, with the FPS meter rising to around 120, with visuals not affected by any game-breaking way to my eyes. Finally, we have Marvel Rivals, another competitive title which relies heavily on reaction times, tracking, flicking, and just having generally, I suppose, well-rounded FPS skills. At 1440p max settings, the game ran around 85 FPS on average, but if you turn on DLSS performance at 1440p, that'll see an increase of around 40 FPS, with the built-in benchmark running at or just below 120 FPS most of the time. This game supports 4x multi-frame generation, and turning this on at 1440p, along with the same DLSS performance settings, results in big performance gains, albeit at the cost of latency. Fake frame brigade, I'm kind of with you on this one. The FPS meter rises to between 350 to 400 FPS, a pretty huge gain, but I don't think you'd really want to play a competitive shooter like that with frame gen on. But you know, it's swings and roundabouts. You might want to, you might not want to. It's a feature there to use it if you want. Finalising the testing with Marvel Rivals at 4K then, the rasterised performance was a little disappointing, running at 50 FPS on average. Turning on DLSS sees this improve, obviously, pushing the meter up to around 90 FPS most of the time. And finally, just for completeness, adding in frame gen to the mix will bump the FPS counter up by quite a bit, as we've seen in all of the titles when we've turned it on, and it now sits well north of 200, sometimes hitting around 250. There we have it then. The gaming performance, I think, was decent, especially at 1440p, where the 5070 Ti will excel, to be fair. Again, we can clearly see the benefits of using NVIDIA's latest features. Love them or hate them, they can help in certain situations, especially in single player titles. If you want your game to feel smoother, if you're struggling to run something, frame gen and DLSS can help with that. I know not everyone likes them. Let's take a look at clock speeds, thermals, power use and noise levels before we wrap the video up then. Running through a sustained 30 minutes Cinebench R23 benchmark sees peak or clock speeds hit and pretty much maintain 5.2 GHz for the entirety of the run. CPU power usage peaks at 244 watts and runs on an average of 214 watts by the end of the 30 minutes. CPU package temperature peaks at 88 degrees, so the cooler is doing a pretty good job of keeping the processor running kind of cool and to its potential, allowing it to flex its kind of weak Intel muscles a little bit, I suppose. Single core performance, again during a 30-minute Cinebench run, paints a similar-ish picture. P-Core 0 boosts to 5.5 GHz very briefly at the start of the run before dropping back to 5.2 GHz. The other P-Cores only hit 5.2 GHz throughout the test and not the stated 5.5 GHz boost clocks claimed by Intel. The CPU package temperature during this single core stress test peaks at 67 degrees and power use peaks at 47 watts but averages out at 30 watts by the end of the test. And both of these tests were recorded with PL1 and PL2 power limits of 250 watts, which is the processor's maximum turbo rating. After around 30 minutes of gaming, the GPU temperature peaks at 70 degrees, while GPU memory peaks at 66 degrees, and then the CPU package reached a maximum temperature of 67 degrees. That's after 30 minutes of sustained Cyberpunk 2077. Here's some thermal footage to show how that translates to heat across the board and components. And just bear in mind that this is without the side panel, the glass panel on the side of the case, due to the thermal camera really struggling with the glass, and it's more accurate if I take the panel off, but obviously when you've got the case on, airflow is a little bit better. And finally, here's a few short clips showing the noise levels during different scenarios. So there we have it then. That was my full rundown of the powered by MSI Project Zero Essential pre-built desktop from Cyberpower PC. That's quite the name. It's a pretty decent system in all honesty. It's easy to turn your nose up at Intel-based gaming PCs in 2025, especially when they contain Core Ultra series CPUs, but I think it performed pretty well, okay. There are things I'd improve upon, the memory being the first one that comes to mind. It could be faster, it could have better timings, and it could have RGB to match the rest of the RGB vibe that this computer's got going on. XMP not being enabled is a bit of a rookie error, in all honesty. That's not something I've seen from Cyberpower before. It's easy enough for enthusiasts to sort out, but not so much for someone who has no idea what XMP even is. That and the GPU drivers being a few months out of date, especially at this time of year when new games and hence new drivers are dropping more regularly, those two things could do with a little improvement. But with that being said, I like the design and most of the component choices. It's a solid 1440p gaming machine with some room to push up to 4K, especially if you don't mind using FrameGen or DLSS. And the price isn't too bad either. A £100 to £200 rough markup for the warranty, Cyberpower building it and delivering it, that ain't that bad at all. So, fish tank or Cybertruck, it's maybe a bit of both, but more importantly, it's a gaming PC that I think makes sense and works pretty well. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a like down below if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to Kit Guru to keep up with the latest PC gaming news and reviews. If you go down below this video, you'll find links to our merch store where you can grab yourself a hoodie or a t-shirt or something like that. And then in the video's description, there are more links to our Discord server, our Patreon page, and our website if you want to go and check any of that stuff out. Anyway, guys, I've been Matt. This has been the Powered by MSI Project Zero Essential Pre-Built Desktop from Cyberpower PC. That is a name. I will speak to you in the next one. Look after yourselves. See you later.